Itauma. A lot of people are saying that he's the next future bright heavyweight coming up. And in this video, I'm gonna give my thoughts on where I think Itauma's at and whether I think he's got a bright future in the sport or not. I first saw Moses Itauma when he made his debut on a Queensberry card. To be honest, I actually didn't know much about him when he turned pro. And then after I saw him in his debut, I think he blew the guy out in the first round. And, it was kind of like your typical debut that you see from a fighter that's been signed to a big promotional company like Queensberry. They go in there, they blow the guy out, and it's really hard to gauge whether the fighter's any good or not because he was in there with someone that he really shouldn't have been in there with. After that, I did a bit of research and I found out that he was undefeated as an amateur. He was 20-0 with 10 knockouts, at least according to BoxRec. And he'd sparred a lot of top guys like Lawrence Okolie, and they were very complimentary about Itauma. And Itauma at 15 was sparring guys like Okolie and other top-level heavyweights, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. I mean, most 15-year-olds, couldn't hang with, professionals who are matured and world-class at what they do. I mean, the only other example I can think of that in recent times is David Benavidez when he sparred Kelly Pavlik, and that's a really good video to watch if you haven't seen it. It's just incredible seeing Benavidez at 15, and he's in there with Pavlik, who I think is 30 at the time. And it's just like mind-boggling that the way he's holding his own in there at that age is just something that you don't see every day. And that's kind of what Moses Itauma was doing with guys like Lawrence Okolie, turning up to sparring sessions in his school uniform. I mean, that's just stuff that you don't see sort of every day. But, getting down to the business end of this video, I've been very impressed with what I've seen in Itauma. He's a 250-pound guy and he moves unnaturally fast for a guy of that size. And he can explode into shots. He's a southpaw, and, there's not been many southpaw heavyweight world champions. You've had Alexander Usyk, and I think before that you had Charles Martin and Michael Moorer. And I think they may actually be the only 3 heavyweight world champions. So that adds an element to him. And, not a lot of heavyweights would have sparred or prepared for southpaws. And that can give you an advantage straight away because your whole life have been fighting orthodox guys from a southpaw stance. You know all about the angles, how to get off your backhand, where to move to avoid certain shots. So I think that gives Moses a very big advantage. But not only that, the fact that he was able to knock Dempsey McKean out in a round, and it took Philip Hrgović 12 rounds, that just shows you the level of talent and ability that he has, that a top 10 contender like Philip Hrgović wasn't really able to stop Dempsey McKean or really put him down. I mean, he got the TKO in round 12, but McKean was still on his feet, when the stoppage happened. When he got knocked out by Itauma, he was trying to get up to his feet and he was kind of just stumbling all over the place. I think he's got a lot of questions to ask, even though he has a lot of talent. But I think the future's bright for Itauma. I don't know, I just got this gut feeling that he is going to go on and win at least a version of the world title and possibly become undisputed. And I think there's a lot of pressure on him. There's going to be a lot of people who doubt him, and that's normal. Whenever there's a young prospect coming through in boxing, there's always a certain subsect of boxing fans who are very skeptical about him, and until he's kind of jumped through all the hoops and kind of beaten most of the people, then they start to believe and say, oh, well, actually this guy was pretty good. But I think with Itauma, my gut is telling me that he is going to go on at And at least, I'd be very surprised if Itauma didn't win at least a version of the heavyweight world title. I think the amount of talent that he has, combined with the backing that he has in Frank Warren, I'd be pretty shocked if he didn't, throughout the rest of his career, at least win a version of the heavyweight world title. And when you look at the heavyweight division and how the landscape is changing with Alexander Usyk potentially retiring and the belts becoming vacant, there'll be plenty of opportunities for Moses Itauma to get his hands on a world title. His most recent fight against Dillian Whyte, I was impressed by it, but to be honest and to be objective about it, Whyte wasn't at his best. That wasn't Whyte at his best, but you can't blame Moses Itauma. He can only beat what was put in front of him, and he did a very good job of it. There was reports that Whyte was possibly coming in with an injury, but even with that, if you put that version of Dillian Whyte in with a lot of other heavyweights, how many of them would have done what Moses Itauma did and knocked him out with under 90 seconds pretty much? Not many, and I think that pretty much emphasizes the precocious talent that Itauma is. He has an ability to do something that not a lot of 250-pound guys can do. He can explode into a shot that is, I've never seen a 250-pound guy do that. Like, there's never been a heavyweight that has moved like Itauma. Like, people will say Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury was a little bit different. He was more elusive. He was more slippery. He was more of a guy who would move around the ring, but he wasn't as explosive as Itauma. And he didn't have the same sort of, like, crispness in his punches. Like, Fury was an unnatural mover in another kind of way, and Itauma's an unnatural mover in a more explosive way. And he's kind of got this mind-body control about him that you just don't see from a guy who's 250 pounds. And that's probably what excites me most about Moses Itauma going forward, is that he could very well be a phenom in the division with the talent that he has, but he does have a lot of questions to answer. We don't know about his chin. We don't know what his stamina's like. We don't know what his heart's like. We don't know what he's like when someone's actually coming forward and sticking it on him. I think that's the kind of biggest question I ask. Like, if you put Moses Itauma in there with like a Gerald Miller, and Miller's not the best heavyweight out there, but one thing that Miller will do is he'll give you rounds and he'll be in your face for at least 7, 8, 9, 10 rounds, if not the whole fight. Yeah, Miller did get stopped against Daniel Dubois, but you've got to factor in that he took that Dubois fight on very short notice and probably wasn't in the best of condition. And when we looked at him last time out against Andy Ruiz, I personally thought he beat Andy Ruiz. Even though it was given a draw, I feel like he beat Andy Ruiz. He took his best punches. So it's very unlikely that Itauma would go in there and blow him out. So I think that's a logical next fight for him. And it will also tell us what Moses is like on the back foot. Because Miller, who's like 300 pounds and throws a lot of punches and has a very good chin, will put consistent pressure on Moses Itauma. And it would answer some big questions. I mean, it could answer questions about his heart, about his chin, about all of those things. But yeah, I think Moses has got a very bright future, and I think he's going to be here to stay. I mean, anything can happen, you know, when you're looking at a young prospect coming through. He could have a dodgy chin, he could have stamina. I remember when David Price was on his come up and he looked $1 million, and then he was put in with Tony Thompson, and, you know, you started to see flaws in him that didn't allow him to progress through the levels. And maybe that might happen with Moses Itauma, but I doubt it. I just have a good feeling that Itauma is going to at least win a version of the heavyweight world title, at the very least. Whether he'll be undisputed or not, I don't know if I could be as confident about saying that, because he is going to fight a lot of people with different styles, people that he's probably not seen before in the amateurs, because he's not like Alexander Usyk, who had like 315 amateur fights, or what was it, 335 amateur fights, and had kind of seen it all before, been in the World Series of Boxing, won an Olympic gold medal. Itauma has less experience than Usyk, so he is going to be put in certain situations as a professional that he hasn't been in. And it's going to be very interesting to see how he reacts to those. But all of that notwithstanding, I still think Itauma is going to be most likely the future of the heavyweight division. I like his temperament, and I think he's just got a freakish sort of attribute about him that is going to be very difficult for a lot of heavyweights to deal with. I mean, another question I have about Itauma is how he is in the later rounds. Because early he looks like an absolute handful. I mean, I don't think there's any heavyweight right now who I can conclusively say wouldn't have any issues with Itauma in the early rounds. Even Alexander Usyk, yeah, I think Itauma early, at least early, would give Usyk a lot of problems, because Usyk would be in there with someone who has a set of attributes that he hasn't been in there with for a long time. And it would be a 38-year-old Usyk. I mean, the experience of Usyk would obviously show as the fight goes on, and you'd pick him to win. But early, I think Itauma would have a chance. I really do. And also, he's a southpaw. Southpaw against southpaw. And the reason I mention that is southpaws, they're not used to fighting a lot of other southpaws. Like Errol Spence is a good example of this. When he fought Terence Crawford, the southpaw stance of Crawford gave him a lot of problems. He couldn't get away from the jab. He couldn't get away from the right hand, the lead hand of Crawford. And if you actually see, pretty much all of the knockdowns came from the lead hand of Crawford. It wasn't the power backhand of Crawford that dropped him. And that just goes to show that when you have two southpaws in there, one of them's always going to have a difficult time dealing with the other one. Now listen, I've seen Usyk fight southpaws. He fought Glowacki, but it's been a while. He's never fought a heavyweight southpaw, not a 250-pound one who can explode into his shots the way Itauma is. So all I'm saying is it would be interesting. I would actually be intrigued by that fight. I know a lot of people, I'm not saying he deserves it, but I'm saying if that fight got made, let's say Itauma had another fight or two and won them, and let's just say that Turkey wants that fight because he sees Itauma as potentially the future of the division, like many do. I'd be interested in that fight. I know a lot of people will be like, what you're talking about, the guy's at 10 fights, he's not ready for Usyk. I actually think it'd be one of the more intriguing matchups out there for Alexander Usyk. He'd be facing a southpaw, a guy coming at him from a different angle, a guy who's probably 15, 16 years younger than him, and a guy who just has an aura about him where, to me, he just feels like he could be anyone right now. And that's a dangerous man. You know, he's almost got a defiance-ness about him that I think we all have when we're younger. And kind of as you get older and older, you kind of get beaten down into the norm. Whereas Itauma hasn't had that yet. And that sort of naivety actually makes him dangerous, you know. So, look, I'm not saying he should fight Usyk and he deserves it. You've obviously got Parker and Caballero there. But, you know, if the fight got made and it was the fight that we're getting, I'd actually be interested in that fight. I'm not saying that I think he beats Usyk, but I think it'd be a lot more interesting than what a lot of people think. You know, I think it'd be a lot more interesting than what a lot of people. I don't think it'd just be a schooling from start to finish because Itauma hasn't got the experience. I think Usyk could have a rough few rounds in there for sure. But yeah, those are just my thoughts on Moses Itauma. I do want to see him do well because I think he's good for the division. I know he's going to have a lot of pressure on him and a lot of naysayers and a lot of people who aren't drinking the Kool-Aid yet. And I think that's fair enough, to be honest. I mean, it's not like he's proven himself. I mean, his best win is a washed-up Dillian White, let's be honest about it. But you can't deny the talent.